Very good morning and welcome to Media Monitor, your favorite news analysis program. Coming up on the show today, there seems to be no winning in the fight against municipalities' irregular expenditure. Shocking incidents of child killing surfaced during the Child Protection Week. And we start our Youth Month discussions by asking, is it fair that our young generation is constantly being compared to that of 1976? And we pay tribute to the fallen boxing legend Muhammad Ali. As always, a quick look at the news headlines at 9 a.m. Central African time. Good morning to you. President Jacob Zuma says Gauteng belongs to the ANC and no other party should run the province. He was speaking at the party's Gauteng manifesto launch at the FNB Stadium in Johannesburg yesterday. It was all glitz and glamour at the 22nd Summer Music Awards in Durban last night. Nathi Manganyi, the Nomvula hitmaker, walked away with 5 trophies. Black Coffee and MT were also among the best winners of the night. And Bafana finally came good yesterday when they hammered Gambia 4-0 in a 2017 Africa Cup of Nations qualifier. However, our boys don't stand a realistic chance of qualifying for AFCON. Well, taking us through the stories that's been trending on social media is SABC producer Ntswaki Shweshwe. Very good morning to you, Ntswaki.
Good morning to you, Alicia, and good morning to the viewers at home.
All right, and also giving us insight on the stories we have today, social media commentator Melo Makgolego and media analyst Nompumelelo Runji, and of course a force to be reckoned with in the industry. I'm talking about now Professor Matata Tsedu, and later on we will be joined by political analyst Professor Somadoda Figeni from our Pretoria studios. But first up, a quick look at the digital news makers of this week, which is why you're here, Ntswaki. What made you run around the digital aspect of things this week?
So this week we kicked off Youth Month, and it was the Child Protection Week. And this got a lot of traction on the social media platform, people talking about the rights of children. And we know that our constitution guarantees children rights. And so with Child Protection Week, there's a lot of incidents, as you spoke about one now, that's in the news. And I want to read some of the comments that people are having on social media.
What are people saying on social media?
So Tolagele Mlambo is saying that Child Protection Week is almost over. Why can't this be a lifetime thing? A lot of children suffer because of irresponsible adults' action. And this one here, Child Protection Week, but there are 2 5-year-olds who were found raped, killed, and hanged on a tree. And this is the incident that happened in Limpopo.
Very concerning, views coming through on social media. Is this the sort of conversation that you saw playing out in terms of Child Protection Week?
This is the sort of conversations that we saw playing out. But also we saw parents worried about, what do I do as a parent to protect my child from these social media or predators that are on the internet? Because for most parents, the internet is still a transcendent idea.
But you know what I found interesting, Twag, is somebody, Tolagele here, says a lot of children suffer because of irresponsible adults. Was this the general outlook from the public on social media as well?
Well, I mean, it was a general outlook. So people are saying parents have a responsibility and they should therefore take care of the children, because children are children at the end of the day. And I suppose the responsibility will lie with the parents.
What else was making you busy this week?
Okay, so yesterday, everyone was talking about Muhammad Ali, and we are going to be paying tribute later on the show.
Yes.
Even this morning, tributes still continue to pour in. He passed away at the age of 74. He was a boxing legend, or maybe more than a boxing legend to many. And here, Jackson Mvunganyi says Mandela and Muhammad Ali shared a boxing background and commitment to human rights and social justice. And David Cameron, who's the Prime Minister, the British Prime Minister, said Muhammad Ali was not just a champion in the ring, he was a champion of civil rights and a role model for so many people. So these are some of the conversations that we see, and they continue. I'm sure, it's going to be something that, Muhammad Ali will be trending at least until his funeral on Friday.
Absolutely.
So we'll see how it goes.
What else made you talk in the digital media sphere?
Okay, so the summers you saw earlier on, and everyone's going to be talking about those Black Coffee and MT came up tops. Now, if you are like me and happen to just fall asleep halfway through the program, you can go to the SABC digital news channel on YouTube and you'd be able to watch the whole ceremony.
All right. But did people congratulate the winners? I mean, I know there was a big issue around how nominations are chosen specifically for the summers. What were people saying on social media?
Well, people were congratulating the winners, MT, Black Coffee, but also there was a lot of talk with AKA Agawinanga, and there were a lot of conversations going on around obviously the nomination and some of the artists withdrawing from that. So interesting conversation. If you are on social media, just go check the summers, and obviously on our YouTube channel, you'll be able to see a lot more of the comments that people have.
Ntswaki, thank you so much for being with us right here on Media Monitor. She will be back next week and she will give us an outlook on what you at home is saying on social media as well as our digital media aspect. Thank you so much, Ntswaki.
Thank you.
Our first story today, incidents of child rights violations continue to haunt the news headlines as the country observed the Child Protection Week, which officially ends today under the theme Caring Communities Protect Children. In Gauteng, a 7-year-old girl was killed by her cop father in Hammanskraal, north of Pretoria, on Wednesday morning before he committed suicide. On Tuesday, a 33-year-old man was arrested after he allegedly slit the throats of his 2 children, aged 4 and 6, and disemboweled them in Ladysmith in KwaZulu-Natal. 2 suspects were also arrested for the kidnapping, rape and murder of 2 5-year-old girls who were found hanging from a tree over the weekend. My goodness. But look, before we get into this discussion, Papa said, I just want to congratulate you first on your promotion. You will now be a professor at Wits. Congratulations.
Yeah, no, I am. I started in May, so I'm getting used to being called prof. Sometimes people say prof and I don't really respond because it hasn't really sunk in yet. Yeah, maybe when you come and join and become a student there, I'll know for sure this is real.
I'll be there, definitely.
Yeah.
All right, well, very sad news to begin the show with. Let's start with the stats. 2 out of 3 children have apparently experienced some sort of sexual abuse by the time that they become teenagers. What do you think about this? Let's start with you, Nombo.
Yeah, we live in a society that is very dangerous for children. If we look at the statistics, it's a very, not only is childhood a vulnerable period of life, right, where you need protection, where children need protection from parents and adults around them. They look up to adults, for guidance, for care. But in this country, there's an additional vulnerability in that children are vulnerable to all sorts of exploitation. And sexual exploitation is one of the biggest exploitations, and we top statistics around the world about sexual violence in general and violence against women and children in general. So we need to be asking ourselves, what kind of society are we? What kind of family structures do we have where fathers turn on their daughters, where parents turn on their children, prey on their children. So there's a lot for us to reflect on. And I think this week is important because not only are these things taking place during Child Protection Week, a lot of the time we hear about these stories, but we don't give them the attention that they require. They happen every single day in our country. So Child Protection Week is important because we get to stop and reflect on the plight of children in this country.
Melo, a lot of people, as we saw on our social media platforms, they seem to say this is up to the parents. Do you think it's the issue here of irresponsible parents?
I think, well, there's 2 aspects to this thing. The one aspect, obviously, you can attribute malice on people, that people are intentionally doing it to harm people, to harm children. On the other side, there's also an issue sometimes of ignorance. Say, for example, trafficking with child pornography and so on, that parents may not be aware of those things. So I think those 2 things need to be held in tension at the same time. So for me, this is where the media plays a very critical role in terms of awareness, because there are so many things competing for our attention on a day-to-day basis. To have that week that's blocked out and saying that, no, here we're going to raise awareness about child issues, I think what that does is that sometimes it communicates to parents that these are some of the things that you need to be aware of. Because because society is not static, society is constantly changing, and we're also having urbanization, our communities are changing. So parents also need to be made aware that maybe the childhood or the type of environment in which you grew up in no longer persists and pertains, and we're in a different type of environment where different challenges need to be met. So for me, I do think, yes, there is an element of responsibility on the part of the parents, but I do think that the media also is doing a very good job in terms of highlighting some of the issues.
Papa Tsedu, as a grandfather and a father, what does it say to you when you hear shocking statistics like this?
It's actually quite bad, and this particular week we look at the case that is going on in the High Court from Boksburg,
yes.
And the harrowing tales that came out of there. These are not children who are being abused outside; it's inside the home. There was a piece run by Sky News during the week of a guy who preyed on more than 2,000 children in Manila. He's a British guy who went there and was using the church. So the issue of abusing children, we may be number one, but we are number one of many other countries that are also experiencing this thing. And there is a need to actually just educate people. And that's where we come in as media. We need to really play this thing up all the time. When the judge said what she said about people abusing children, she was wrong in the racial stereotyping that she was using. But the gist of the stats that she was using are the same stats that you are confirming today here.
All right, that's where we're going to leave it. We're going to take a quick ad break, and when we return, we're going to turn our attention to the power of the youth as we mark Youth Month. Do stay with us.
Africa is growing. As a result, it's also advancing the way it does things.
Any developments in technology can really do a lot to boost growth.
On Network, we'll show you how technology is improving the lives of Africans.
The life of an LED globe is 15 times longer than what they have currently.
We also have new gadgets, games, and the continent's innovative technology ideas. That's Network with me, Spumelele Zondi, every Sunday at 19:30 Central African Time.
Media Monitor. Do interact with us at SA Media Monitor. With me, social commentator Melo Makgolejo and media analyst Nompumelelo Runji, as well as veteran journalist Professor Matata Tsedu. Now, the month of June is celebrated as Youth Month here in South Africa. It acknowledges the role that South African youth played in the fight against the apartheid regime. And special focus is on June 16th, the day in which black youth organized in Soweto to oppose the use of Afrikaans as a medium of instruction at schools, of which they viewed it as a language of the oppressor. Let's hear your views on this one. Melo, let's start with you.
I think for me, in terms of comparing youth of 76 to the youth of today, it is a bit of an unfair comparison. And part of the reason is because apartheid as a system in itself was so total and homogenizing that it became easier for people to coalesce around a single point of saying that, no, we're going to resist Afrikaans because it's affecting all of us. But at the end of the day, if you look at today, there's different challenges that meet different people. And one of the things that you look at in terms of what the government has done since 1994, we've had the emergence of a black middle class. So you've had class stratification within the black community. So what you might find as concerns of one group of black people might not necessarily be concerns for another group of black people. So for me, I think to talk about youth apathy as though it were a homogeneous effect, that is not true. Because if you look at on the ground in terms of some of the grassroots people, in terms of informal settlements and those type of things, you do find that people, they are very vocal and very activist there. But what you might find is that in some of the people who are maybe more in the upper classes of society, they might be less likely to be as activist in their struggle because some of the benefits they've already accrued them from what has been done.
Papa Tsedu, you were here in 1976. What can you tell us about the difference in struggles between the youth of today and 1976? Is it fair to compare those?
Not in detail, but I think the June 76 students or youth are seen as an embodiment of a commitment to do right. And that is a message that will remain constant and valid for eternity.
Yes.
So it's not as if people are being asked to stop going to school and pick up stones and do this and that. It's about going back to Fanon, saying each generation has to find its mission and either betray it or fulfill it. Now, the mission today, it's not the same as the mission in 1976, but the demand on the youth to be engaged and to be committed to doing right remains valid.
Speaking of that, I mean, the language and fees seems to be the basis of today's protest, and even back then. Does this mean we haven't progressed, Nompumelelo?
No, I think the youth of today have drawn lessons from the youth of 1976, that it's important to stand up for what you think is right in your generation and to put your energy and life behind that struggle. And I think that's what we saw with the student protests over roads must fall and fees must fall. And what we're continuing to see is struggles at the University of Pretoria over language policy. So young people are taking the opportunity to stand up for what they think is important to them in this generation at this time. But also the point that was made about the fact that youth in South Africa are no longer a homogenous group. That's why the struggles at the different universities are different struggles. They're not necessarily mirror images of each other. Stellenbosch has a different issue to what UCT is facing, for instance. And the previously black universities as well have issues that are not the same as the issues, for instance, at Wits University. So we see young people taking up their struggles in their own spheres of influence. And also, let's not leave out other young people in the country. We see young people organizing even at community level in the rural areas as well, in townships. Those are the people who are actually at the forefront of some of these service delivery protests that we see. They are demanding a certain level of accountability from their councillors, from from the municipality, etc. So young people are actually engaged, and they want to have a say in their own development in the future of this country. We may not necessarily always agree in the forms of participation that they choose, because obviously there's also the issue of why is it that young people don't register to vote in their numbers, for instance.
Yes.
Does that mean that they're not interested in the future of this country? Does that mean they're not engaged? But when you look at the fact that they're involved in other non-conventional forms of participation, you realize that young people are engaged, and perhaps political parties and the political system needs to begin to harness that energy in a different way.
But Nompumelelo, I mean, with that said, having a say in your future, what do you then say about them going about destroying educational facilities?
Yeah.
Will this send a message, and what kind of message is that, Papa said?
That is where the line needs to be drawn.
Absolutely.
Because even in 1976, when the bannings happened, it was beer halls and not schools that were banned. There were institutions that were seen as symbolic of a regime that had no care for them. When people at Vuani start banning 24 schools, that's totally out of order. And we don't even know whether it was the youth who did it, or whether it was some councillor who didn't want to lose his position. But that's where the line has to be drawn, because the narrative has changed. The government that we're talking about today is a democratic government that says it does listen to people. In 1976, Kruger would just say to you, or Triernecht, who was a deputy minister at the time, who would just say to you, we pay the teachers, we build the schools, so we're going to determine what language you're going to be taught in, and it is going to be my language, Afrikaans. So that's it, you have to live with that. That's not the same scenario in which we are today, and maybe that is the message that it's not getting through to people, that there are different ways of getting the results that the 76 generation needed to do through stones and fire.
All right, I see you both want to say something, but unfortunately we have to take some tweets on this topic now. Let's have a look at what some of you are saying at home. Hlonye Nyetang says, being unemployed was practically a transgression for the youth in the past. Now it's a socially accepted norm. Thank you so much for that tweet. Juliet Mokwena says, no, 1976, fight for democracy. 2016, fight for transformation of the economy and sports. Beauty says, I don't think so. This generation destroys that one build. And last but not least on this topic, Anina Fan Ramkhulam says, it should not be compared, as many things have changed, like democracy and even technology, as well as people's mindset. All right, we're going to take a very quick ad break, and after that, wasteful expenditure almost overshadows the advances made by our municipalities. More after this break. This is Media Monitor.
Why are electoral systems important in a democracy?
We think of democracy as voting people into office. The other side of the coin is that we would be more empowered and more accountable in politics if we could do the opposite, is vote them out when they don't deliver.
Politics is about who gets what, when and how.
If you look up on the internet as to how the head of state is chosen, it says monarchy.
We should not refer to an election as a contest.
So we should not shy away from the fact that an election is a contest. Of course, I do admit that it's not a bloody contest, or it shouldn't be a bloody contest.
It shouldn't be a bloody
people,
contest.
Fight and, of course, and
it should also not be a beauty contest.
Then it shouldn't be also a beauty contest either.
Swiss people, for example, can travel internationally with a cantonal passport, not even a national one. That's like us traveling on a Free State passport, for example.
Welcome back to Media Monitor. Now, the Auditor General presented his 2014-2015 audit report this week. And despite noted improvement with municipalities reporting their financial statements for audit and few attaining qualified reports, gross irregular spending remains the biggest challenge.
Down to another area of undesirable expenditure which we are required to report on is the area of fruitless and wasteful expenditure. In short, this is expenditure incurred in vain. It arises in situations where a person in a finance department is required to make a regular payment to a particular supplier, and if there are penalty and other clauses in that particular agreement and that deadline has not been complied with, it will result in a payment to that particular service provider, which will be a payment without receiving any benefit for it. And that's why we are saying it is fruitless and wasteful. It's also things like interest paid on debts that are due, which were supposed to be paid by a particular due date, but because they were not, they also attract an additional cost in the form of interest.
All right, for this discussion, let's also welcome political analyst Professor Somadoda Figeni from our Pretoria studios. Prof, a very good morning to you. Always a pleasure. Thank you for being with us.
Good morning to you, Ms. Jali, and good morning to your listeners.
All right, Prof, let's start with you. I mean, the AG clearly stated that there are some improvements, but reiterated that there are some serious concerns. I mean, what do you attribute the irregular expenditure to?
Well, I do think that it's a combination of three things. The first one being capacity issue, especially in your mostly rural municipalities, which do not normally attract, good quality. And the second one is simply political, where you have political fragmentation. Consequence leadership is hardly ever exercised because one faction versus another faction, you can't touch my people, you can't touch my people. And the third one is corruption, where people simply have these irregular expenditures deliberately because they wanted to benefit this or that person. And ultimately, it's a combination of those things.
Look, financial mismanagement for municipalities is the basis for many service delivery protests. Let's talk about this. I want to hear your views. Let's start with you, Mel.
I think for me, the thing that the Auditor General's report speaks to is about financial reporting and accounting of what happens within the municipalities and districts. Another aspect which directly relates to that and which we do not talk about is financial health. Because there's a reporting that it looks at as whether people are actually accounting for the expenditure and whether it isn't money flowing out illicitly.
Yes.
Then the other aspect also is in terms of financial health, and that's the big stories that are coming out in terms of the S&P ratings, Fitch and Moody's, because what that is looking at is whether or not the municipalities can be able to sustain themselves as going concerns. I think both these factors contribute to what we're seeing on the ground in terms of service delivery protests, because there's infrastructure that needs to get put in and businesses are struggling and businesses are not able to do business, they're not getting paid on time and those type of things. Those are things that speak to the financial health aspect of the thing. So for me, I think it's very important that we address some of the issues in terms of competence on the ground, as the Professor Somadoda Figeni has spoken to, in terms of capacitating the municipalities in order to be able to both report and secondly to also be able to direct expenditure to infrastructure that's going to be able to improve the general operation of municipalities.
Nombomelelo, I want you to speak on this. I mean, let's commend the vast improvement, specifically the Eastern Cape, the Free State and Mpumalanga, but what do you think they did right?
Well, if you look at previous Auditor General reports, you'll find that one of the challenges has been following procurement processes.
Yes.
And actually following what is provided for in legislation, for instance. So many of these municipalities would just haphazardly do their finances, and especially towards the audit period. Then they try and spend the money and try and make sure that the money is spent so that when it's time to ask for more money, they'll receive the budget, for instance. But what we're seeing is that there's better following of the processes that are provided for instance, in the PFMA legislation, for instance. So if we get more capacity in that area, more capacity in terms of when we procure something, what forms are there to fill out, because those forms are there to make sure that there is accountability. Is there receipting, for instance, or receipts brought back for certain expenditure? Because some municipalities will get a qualified audit because they fail to produce documents. Not so much that they didn't spend the money properly, but there's no paper trail to show what actually happened, what procedure and process was followed to actually fulfill the mandate of spending this money, for instance. So we see improvements in that, and we need to see a lot more of that moving forward.
Professor Ted, what do you think? I mean, the issue of accountability or legislation, when you do give money without really having consequences, a lot can happen. People go and start their own businesses and buy new mansions and cars.
Yeah, and I think it's important to also look at what the Auditor General's report says about how many state employees are doing business with the state itself, because that's where the crux of the corruption starts. And when you look at what is going on now, that the list process is underway, the fights that are going on, it's not fights about people who feel they are better qualified to provide a better public service. It's about me being in there so that when I'm there, I can then do the following for me. So that's really the crux of what the Auditor General is dealing with. The technical aspects that have been mentioned both by Prof. Fegeni and my fellow panelists here are valid in that you actually do need people who will be able to make sure that things happen in the manner in which they should. But even in places where you have a good accountant who is sitting in the office and he says, you can't do that because you haven't done this. The guy comes in and says, I am the councillor and I am saying it should happen. And then it happens because he's using political power. That's the crux. And until we get to a point where politically the people who are coming into office are coming in to actually do public service, we will always have this problem.
Let's go back to Pretoria. Professor Figeni, I mean, how then should municipal monies be allocated? We know that local government elections are coming up.
Well, I do think that they should be allocated without the pressure of local government. But there's another point I wanted to make, is to say that if political parties like the ANC or the DA, which have substantial number of municipalities on the ground, believe that this is the most important delivery, service delivery point closest to the people, they ought to deploy their most senior cadres at municipal level rather than the current perception that you start at municipality with your lowest capable political leadership and you go to provinces, it's your progression until you get to national. It should be the other way around. In places like Britain, France, once you become a mayor of London or Paris, you are just as good as a person who could become a prime minister or a president.
All right. We're going to take a very quick ad break and we're going to come back with more Media Monitor. Do stay with us. All right. Before we take that break, here are some of the tweets on social media and let's hear what you've been saying regarding this. Brian Durban Boy says, gross failure, unacceptable. So much money has been wasted. Jeffrey Muddy Singh says, clearly DA is doing outstanding work in the Western Cape, and of course in relation to the fact that the DA, the Western Province rather, came out tops as the best performing province in terms of the expenditure. Mohan Mat Africa says, create a budget and stick to it. Nice and simple. Despicable Me says, all those councillors have been pre-approved for the upcoming election. Something to note there. We're going to take a quick ad break. Media Monitor returns shortly after that.
person has been shot dead and another is in a critical condition in hospital.
The CRL has laid charges against controversial televangelist Paseka Mutsoning.
More than 1.3 million South Africans have been added in the past 2 registration weekends.
The International Monetary Fund warns that policy uncertainty could dampen economic growth in South Africa.
And all eyes are on the new Bok coach, Alistair Coetzee, who's challenged to keep everyone in the country happy.
What's wrong with Triple M? What is illegal here? Who is being defrauded here, Trevor?
It is about the best interest of the citizens of this country.
But the citizens are the ones who are playing, who are members or participants in this. If you put in 50,000 rand, after 12 months you get 1.2 million rands. I mean, who wouldn't go for this?
Watch Question Time with me, Mpho Tsedu, Monday to Thursday at 5:30 p.m. on the SABC News Channel.
This is Media Monitor. Welcome back. Remember, you can still interact with us on our Twitter handle at SA Media Monitor. With me still is social commentator Melo Magolego, as well as media analyst Nompumelelo Runje, and of course, Professor Mathata Tsedu. And in our Pretoria studio, we have political analyst Dr. Somadoda Figeni. Now, the U.S. government says its embassy in Pretoria and several consulates in major cities will not be closed following a warning about possible terror attacks at shopping malls at the Johannesburg and Cape Town malls. The U.S. Embassy in Pretoria earlier said the information came against the backdrop of a public call by the Islamic State group to carry out attacks globally during the month of Ramadan. The White House says the embassy and consulates will remain open for business. South Africa's International Relations Department says local security agencies are capable of ensuring the safety of all people residing in the country. And spokesperson Clayson Monyela says law enforcement groups are capable of keeping South Africa safe. Professor Somadoda, please, what do you make of these threats? It's not the first time we're getting such threats, but should we take them seriously?
Each time when you see that other groups like ISIS are under pressure in different places, the Boko Haram and so forth, and South Africa's involvement either in the AU or the UN missions around, as well as the perception that South Africa is a soft target, we should and must always take these kinds of threats seriously. We may be far away from the hotspots, but it is not an impossibility. That's why it is better to be vigilant, even if those may not be ultimately realized.
Thank you so much for your contribution, Professor Somadoda Figeni, and he was joining us from our Pretoria studios. But are we really a soft target when it comes to terror attacks?
Well, for me, the key thing is, let's assume indeed there is this threat from ISIS against malls in this country. Why are we as South Africans hearing about it from Americans? Why are our own security agencies not the ones that are telling us that this is the situation? Now the Americans issue a statement from Pretoria, not even from Washington. They issue it from here, the embassy, and our own government must now scurry around trying to explain to us. Clayson is saying the security systems here in the country are capable of dealing with this problem. But is there a problem like that or not? Should we be hearing about it from the Americans or not? That for me is the shortfall in all of these things.
Melo?
For me, the way I tend to understand terrorism is within the context of political agenda, because terrorism often we see it as people just perpetuating violence senselessly, as there's that one saying that one man's terrorist is another man's liberator. Yeah. So for me, the notion of why Western countries in general tend to be targets for terrorism is precisely because of the action of those governments within that Middle East nexus there. So now the question that you need to ask is, as South Africa, are our actions within the AU and broadly within the UN contributing to us becoming terror targets? And I'm not necessarily convinced, and I haven't seen very convincing argument that would say that South Africa, we've become terror targets because we're encroaching on other people's sovereignty and their way of life. So as to whether or not we are soft targets, for me, the way you protect against terrorism is not necessarily by securitizing and militarizing the solution, but rather also by dealing with it from a political angle. Obviously, there needs to be that security type of response to it, but there also needs to be a political side to the argument. And I do feel that on the political side, we do integrate well with the rest of the African continent, and we try not to elevate ourselves too much, as we've been told in the past that no, we are just part of the continent, that we're not special.
Look, Nompumelelo, there were reports that before the attacks in Belgium actually took place, there was serious warnings. Should we then not fall as part of an example that did not take those threats seriously?
Well, I think what's more important is not so much the threat itself, but how that threat is then communicated and reported on. This thing of creating alarm in the public without a confirmation of something that's actually going to happen, I think is a bit dangerous. The other thing is we never look at the economic implications of countries such as the US and the UK making such statements about other countries, because then you chase away tourists, you mess with the business investment decisions about stability and risk in that country. So I think those issues really need to be looked at. And just to go back to what Prof. Tedu was saying about why are we hearing about it from the US Embassy? Why is the US not communicating with South African intelligence and speaking to them and saying, what do we do then that we see this kind of threat, before they make it a sensational thing? Because issues of terrorism are not issues of public debate. It's about security, apparatus, and making sure that there are interventions in place. Does the army need to be prepared, for instance? Do we need to send special forces to guard those key areas, for instance? And that is a discussion for security personnel and the intelligence agencies. So this tendency to make these things public, I think, is something that we really need to be wary of and need to question the US more about.
All right, that's where we leave it on that discussion. And I'd also like to now thank our social commentator for his contribution here, Melo Magolego. We will be joined after the break by Mr. Dumile Mateza to talk to us about some of the happenings in the sport fraternity this week. We're going to celebrate the legacy of the late boxing legend Muhammad Ali and also look into the interesting sports stories shortly after this break.
Health Talk looks into incorrect lifestyles that lead to chronic diseases. It is extremely important to take care of our bodies to a long, healthy life.
Incorrect eating and being inactive then leads to the person becoming overweight and obese.
The kidney is one of the essential organs of our bodies. It keeps us healthy and extracts toxins from our blood.
The kidney controls the blood pressure. Right. And if the blood pressure is not normal, then your heart is affected, all the blood vessels in your body is affected.
Dialysis is the only solution to kidney failure. The support of the family is crucial.
What made it possible for me is to accept that I've got kidney failure.
Join your host, Dr. Sidla Mutawung, every Saturday from 9 to 10 a.m.
Welcome back and thank you for choosing Media Monitor this morning. Good morning to you once again. Now, the sport fraternity is still reeling following the passing of boxing giant Muhammad Ali. Tributes for the heavyweight great have been pouring in from across the world since his passing on Friday. Let's take a look at this quick insert.
I am the greatest. To understand why so many thought of Muhammad Ali as the greatest, you have to go beyond the boxing ring. At first, his political defiance and radical pride divided the American public. Early in his career, he declared his allegiance to the Nation of Islam, ditching what he called his slave name, Cassius Clay, and becoming Muhammad Ali.
Clay was a white man's name, it was a slave name. And I'm no longer Clay, I'm no longer a slave, so now I'm Muhammad Ali.
In 1967, Ali refused to be drafted into the US military during the war with Vietnam. It cost him his world title and boxing license.
There's one hell of a lot of difference in fighting in the ring and going to war in Vietnam. Boxing is nothing like going to war with machine guns, bazookas, hand grenades, bomber airplanes.
Later, with his credentials restored by the Supreme Court, Ali would return to the boxing ring and regain his reputation with the American public. He was revered for his influence on civil rights in America and around the world. US President Barack Obama said Ali was a man who fought for what was right and praised his life for shaping American society today. President Bill Clinton highlighted Ali's ability to make tough choices and live with the consequences. In the midst of an election where surveillance of mosques and banning Muslims from the United States has been touted, Ali used one of his last public statements to urge politicians not to exploit Islam. Many will hope that in remembering perhaps the world's most famous Muslim, much of America will view Islam in a different, less toxic light.
If his passing could do any more to serve in a humanitarian way, is to bring people together and to recognize our common humanity and also what is best to be human and American.
Witty, radical and courageous, the influence of Muhammad Ali on politics, society and beyond will continue around the world long after his death. Harry Horton, SABC News.
And on this segment, we're also pleased to be joined by Dumile Matez, a sports analyst, as well as a presenter right here on SABC News. Very good morning to you, sir.
Hi, good morning. Nice to be here.
I mean, what are your perceptions? I mean, we lost another... Muhammad Ali was hailed all over the world as a champion for human rights. Talk to us about his great works.
Well, yes, I think the big statement made by Mike Tyson yesterday that God came to fetch his champion, and I think that's what's happened. Muhammad Ali has been a great leader in sport, especially in boxing. He actually made boxing. Born in Louisville, Kentucky on the 17th of January 1942, and he started boxing because legend has it that somebody stole his bicycle and they didn't know how to beat them, and he decided to take up boxing. And he took up boxing, and he actually fought 100 fights without losing in the amateurs, and went to fight for what was then known as the Golden Gloves tournament. For the Americans have the Golden Gloves tournament for amateurs. He represented America in the 1960 Rome Olympics. And that's the last Olympics, by the way, in which South Africa took part before South Africa were kicked out. He won a gold medal there in the light heavyweight division. And when he got to America, he wouldn't be allowed to enter a restaurant. He took the gold medal and said, even though I won a gold medal, I'm not respected. Took a gold medal and threw it into the river, to the Mississippi River, and forgot about it. But years later, the IOC gave him another medal. But Ali fought a great fight, especially his human rights fights, were to do with the Americans wanted all Americans to be conscripted to go and fight in Vietnam. And Ali refused, said, I'm not going to go and fight in Vietnam. As a result, he was court-martialed, and he was then stripped of his WBA heavyweight title, which he won when he beat Sonny Liston at age 22. And then he stayed, and toward one of the pieces you showed, he was talking to some university student during his time that he was banned. He spoke to university students around America after he adopted the name Muhammad Ali from Cassius Clay Jr. And there's one story that I will never forget. There's a boxer called George Chuvalo. When Ali changed from Cassius Clay to Muhammad Ali, George Chuvalo would refuse to call him Muhammad Ali. He said he's Cassius Clay. And then when they were in the ring, they were fighting, each time Ali threw a punch at George Chuvalo, said, "What's my name? What's my name? What's my name? What's my name?"
Dumile, I just want to involve the rest of my panel here. I mean, this comes at a time, he talks about Muhammad Ali championing human rights. But I mean, it comes at a time where transformation in sport in South Africa has hogged the spotlight. Are we on our way to achieving that across the board, Papa Tsedu?
Maybe it's going still to be a long fight, but to just get back to what Dumile was talking about around Muhammad.
Yes.
The transformation of Cassius Clay into Muhammad was not coincidental. He met up with Malcolm X, and through that interaction, he became a part of the Nation of Islam, where Malcolm X was a preacher. And Muhammad became part of what is known as FOI, the Fruit of Islam. These are the youngsters within the Nation of Islam. And in one of that,
the inserts,
you see him wearing the FOI. That's the stuff. And from there, he became a very politically conscious person and ditched the slave name like Malcolm had done. Malcolm was born Malcolm Little, but he ditched the Little and became Malcolm X, and Cassius Clay ditched Cassius Clay and became Muhammad Ali. And when they were trying to draft him in, he said, "Them Viet Congs never called me no nigger. I'm not gonna fight them." So, and he made a long speech about the injustices that he suffered in America. So, Muhammad is not just another boxer. He was a complete person, a complete black American who understood the challenges of that time and stood for what he believed in. And when eventually he went back to the ring, he proved that he was indeed the fastest. Dumile was giving us one of the examples. But I mean, I remember when he was in Zaire and he was saying, "I'm so fast. When I switch off the light, I'm in bed before the light is off."
No, Pumela, unfortunately, we're just going to take that wealth of knowledge from our two greats in studio. That's where we leave it, unfortunately. We've run out of time, and that was our small contribution to the late, great legend, Muhammad Ali. Thank you so much for watching Media Monitor. We hope that you'll join us again, same time and same place next week. Remember to share your views on the show's digital platform. We are available under the SABC News banner. From me, Alicia Jali, and the rest of the team and my panel in studio, do enjoy the rest of your Sunday. Goodbye. Stuff.
News Today keeps you informed with news locally and around the world.
When Judge John Hlophe challenged the Supreme Court of Appeal when it sent the matter back and said that there must be an inquiry set up.
We unpack business news.
There's an increase in general inflation in the country.
We give you up-to-date news of the day.
The drugs were seized at several locations in Sydney, including a shipping container sent from Hong Kong. Police saying it's the largest haul of illicit drugs in 2 years.
We round up sports news.
Kotata, tell me about the legacy that you would like to build and be remembered for.
Trying to get my foundation running, which is going to focus on, all the sport, doesn't matter disability or able body. So, I'm passionate about sports.
Stay informed every Monday to Friday from 3 to 5:30 p.m. CAT. SABC News.
From very humble beginnings and dusty streets in Hammanskraal, a brother, a son, a friend, a dancer, a choreographer, and a businessman recognized internationally, simply believed in himself, and everything else fell into place because of the fire and passion that was burning inside him.
My childhood was a very happy time for the big part, you know. I was a very loud child. I was rambunctious. I had a lot of energy. You know, I was that kid that would be waking up at night to entertain the elders during family festivities. But I think more than anything, you know, I was also a very confused child. You know, I struggled with a lot of identity issues, you know, because I suppose the way I saw myself inside was always different to the world that I lived in. You know, I grew up in a community where one would say there were no references of, you know, people that I would say lived the sort of life that I saw myself living.
Paul realized that his community didn't have much resources to grow his passion, so he took it upon himself to work on his craft.
To do those classes at 16 was a turning point. At 18, when I got a scholarship in Denmark, that was my breakthrough. I decided to just go for one of the free classes because I was there as an exchange student. And out of that first class, I got called aside by this lady called Martha Gardner, who at the time I didn't know was the principal of this school called the Dancer Værksted Dance Foundation in Denmark. And she said to me who I was and what I was doing. And I explained to her that I was in Denmark for a year for a cultural exchange program. And she said to me she could see that I love dancing. Is this something that I would like to do? And I said, yeah, you know, I love it. I suppose, you know, this is something I've always been passionate about.
As a professional dancer and choreographer, it is vital for him to take care of his body. This career may look easy, but it's not always fun and games. Paul explains what his day usually looks like.
My life is really interesting. If you told me when I was 17 or 15 that my life would be the way it is today, I would have laughed at you. Because of the fact that I was always into routines, I was always into being disciplined and doing things systematically. And I don't think I've lost that. I hustle every day. That I hustle from the moment I wake up till the moment I sleep.
His versatility is the reason why he was appointed as head choreographer for Africa's first dance film, Hear Me Move.
I got the opportunity to choreograph South Africa's first dance film. And they were looking for a choreographer that had an influence or a flair of different styles, but at the same time somebody